Hi, welcome to our presentation on the floodplain connectivity in the southeastern coastal plain rivers. We are going to be focusing on the Ace Basin. I am Madeline Goodman and I will be giving the presentation today. Why does the floodplain connectivity matter? Floodplain connectivity is about how rivers function as connected systems, both longitudinally from headwaters to estuaries and laterally between the channel and the floodplain. When rivers access their floodplains, they move nutrients, create diverse habitats, and allow species to disperse across the landscape. That connectivity strengthens ecological resilience, especially during floods or extreme rainfall events. In the southeastern coastal plain, the challenge is maintaining these natural connections while balancing forestry, infrastructure, and development. Protecting floodplain connectivity isn't just ecological, it's essential for sustaining working landscapes over time. For this project, the focus is on maintaining and restoring floodplain connectivity within southeastern coastal plain river systems using the Ace Basin as a case study. The goal is to show how landscape ecology principles translate into real-world conservation practice. Specifically, we examine hydrologic connectivity, riparian habitat networks, and terrestrial wildlife movement corridors. We also consider how connectivity functions within working landscapes, including forestry operations, infrastructure, and ongoing development. Our approach relies on spatial tools and decision support frameworks to identify priority areas. While balancing ecological function with human land use, partnerships, funding mechanisms, and policy drivers are also key components in making connectivity conservation feasible at a landscape scale. The Ace Basin highlights how landscape heterogeneity is shaped by both natural and human patterns. Naturally, the system includes meandering blackwater rivers, oxbow lakes, tidal creeks, bottomland hardwood forest, and cypress tupelo swamps, creating a diverse floodplain mosaic. At the same time, roads, bridges, historic drainage, managed timberlands, agriculture, and rural development influence how water and species move across the landscape. Understanding this interaction between natural structure and human use is essential, because connectivity in the Ace Basin functions within an actively managed working landscape. These conservation goals focus on restoring and maintaining floodplain connectivity at multiple levels. First, we aim to restore lateral hydrologic connectivity by reconnecting river channels to floodplain forest and supporting natural hydro periods. We also prioritize enhancing riparian habitat networks and wildlife movement corridors across working landscapes. Beyond connectivity itself, the goals include improving forest regeneration and nutrient exchange, increasing climate resilience and natural flood storage, and protecting water quality. Ultimately, the objective is to support sustainable land use and regional economies, ensuring that ecological function and human livelihoods can coexist within the floodplain. I'd like to briefly introduce our expert, Julie Benz. She serves as the director of the Coastal Reserves and Outreach Section within SCDNR's Marine Resources Division and manages the Ace Basin National Estuarine Research Reserve. She is also a member of the Ace Basin Task Force and brings both scientific and educational experience to her role. Julie holds a bachelor's degree in marine science from Stockton College and a master's degree in environmental studies from the College of Charleston. Since joining SCDR in 2012, she has played a key role in advancing coastal education, outreach, and conservation across the region.
Awesome. Pleasure to have you here. All right, first question we had, when SCDNR or the Ace Basin Project works to maintain or restore floodplain connectivity, via building your oyster reefs or planting salt marsh grasses or growing native flowers, what landscape ecology principles do you incorporate to identify or prioritize those areas along the river corridors or the floodplains? And how do those principles translate to the habitat mapping tools that you have or the hydrologic processes and wildlife movement needs that you have?
At DNR, we're very, very lucky in that in the Marine Division, we have an entire resource research institute. So we have 100 scientists, and they are monitoring on a long-term basis and conducting research projects on everything from the worms in the mud to the water quality to all of the plants and animals, all the way up to like sea turtles. So we pull a lot from the 50 plus years of their research to not only understand the way a functioning estuary or ecosystem should act or react to how things are changing now with different climate conditions or with different impacts from human development to so what does the functioning ecosystem look like when it's healthy, right? And then also, if it is degraded, what are the restoration techniques that are working? So that's how we have developed our oyster folks. Our research and our management folks have spent over 20 years researching how to build an oyster reef, how to grow and plant the grass after it, and start to gain that function back from a salt marsh. And those are the methods that we use. So we have a wealth of knowledge to pull from, which is really great. We also, of course, work very much with other groups and use other maps, lots of GIS mapping, lots of planning tools that are out there from other organizations, like the one that I have here is one that we refer to a lot, is the Southeastern Conservation Blueprint. And the darker purple areas are the more higher priority to conserve. And so I have it zoomed in, and it's kind of hard to read the city names, but I've got it zoomed in on kind of South Carolina. And so the below North Charleston, you'll see that big estuary, and the dark purple is the Ace Basin and St. Helena Sound. And so
if you could speak to about the partnerships, funding mechanisms, and policy tools that have been instrumental for your program that you work with, if you could just speak on that for us.
So very specifically in the Ace Basin watershed, is a large group that we call the Ace Basin Task Force, and it's over 35 years old. I think it's now 37 years old. So this started in the 80s, in the 1980s. The red outline is kind of the project area that we of concern. It's loosely the Ace Basin watershed, right? So the confluence of the Edisto, Ashepoo, and Combahee rivers. Those different colors down of closest to the ocean, the purple properties are ours, reserves and state protected properties. But you see the lighter green. The lighter green is private protected property. So one of the most useful tools that the Ace Basin Task Force has been successful to protect, I think we're at 320,000 acres in the watershed, is private conservation easement. So it is still the person's property. They have large tracts of land, but they get different incentives if they place it under a conservation easement. So even if they sell it to somebody, even if they, pass it down in their families, it can't be developed. It can't be like a subdivision. And so that has been a huge, all of the nonprofits, there's Open Space Institute, Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy, all of the conservation organizations, and the private landowners in the area. So it's a bit unique. There's lots of other collaborations around the world of conservation organizations, but this is also has a large part of private landowners that want to see the area conserved. Their land is under conservation easement. They get to tell their neighbors about that and urge them to do it as well. And so I would say that's a key tool. The other fact of it being a partnership that has federal agencies, state agencies, nonprofits, all types of different organizations allows us to be a lot more nimble. because we all have our own resources and we all have our own limitations. So it allows us to sometimes pool funding sources. A lot of the federal funding sources that we use to buy and acquire land to protect is a federal source that usually requires a bit of state match. And so we got to have a little bit of state money and a little bit of Fed money.
So the last question is regarding working landscapes, that it may include infrastructure, forestry, agriculture, or development. How do you balance the goal of maintaining floodplain and riparian connectivity with human land use demands? And what trade-offs or constraints most often influence your applied decisions?
Yeah. A few, I would say we all know on the coast of South Carolina, there's high development pressure and is rapid. And so let me go back to the map because I can show you a bit.
I mean, the entire Charleston Peninsula was built up. Like it didn't exist. We built it.
Yes. And now we feel great about the very coastal areas of the Ace Basin watershed, but just south of there, that goes into the Port Royal Sound all the way to the border to the Savannah River. Especially you can see on 95 the Ridgeland, there's lots of pressure in those areas for development. And so lately the task force has been talking to, again, other landowners down there. A lot of the agencies also work all the way in that area, right? In DNR, we work all over the state. And that we're trying to work with folks further south and make the connectivity all the way to the border, all the way to the Savannah River. So outside of the watershed, to really allow water and wildlife to be able to move in that whole southern part of the state. And so that's kind of, what we're not focusing on the Ace Basin. We're still doing that, but we're also kind of expanding to give it even more space and even more connectivity. The balance. So one of our programs, and this is just me speaking for me and my team, we have a training and engagement program that is very specifically for that person to partner and work with local and county municipalities and planners that work in their planning departments a lot of time, and give them the research and data and technical assistance to be able to do their comprehensive planning and their long-term planning with environmental impact in mind.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It is.
To wrap up, the key takeaway is that long-term monitoring and spatial habitat mapping tools like the Southeastern Blueprint directly guide connectivity-focused restoration in the Ace Basin. Spatial analysis helps identify where conservation actions will most effectively support hydrologic connectivity and wildlife movement. Nature-based solutions such as oyster reef reconstruction and salt marsh planting not only stabilize shorelines but reinforce ecological linkages across river and estuarine systems. Strong partnerships with private landowners are essential, especially in conserved working landscapes. And by integrating sea level rise projections with land use and corridor mapping, managers can prioritize areas before connectivity is lost, bridging science, planning, and on the ground action.